Hello and welcome to another episode of the Burn Desire Show with George Siegal. We've had a few conversations about how to pronounce his surname, so I thought I might get it wrong there, but I think I'm okay. Got it right?
You got it. You got it right. You nailed it.
Sweet. It becomes very repetitive me saying this, but obviously it's new to you. But the way I always like to run these things in the conversation is to start from early on and try and understand what you did like years gone by, whether it was in education or in the early years that maybe led to what you do now. So I know professionally, or I think I know professionally, that you were a weather anchor. But prior to that, I guess you went to college and you did the usual like schooling system. Was there always a plan to go on TV and be in the weather, or how did that come to be?
Well, I originally was hoping to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to law school, but I was not a very good student. I was easily distracted. So that option kind of took care of itself for me. And then, so the next thing I thought I could fall back on was communication skills. And I took a lot of broadcasting classes when I was in college. And so when I got out of college, I just started auditioning or, sending out tapes, trying to get jobs, and eventually stumbled on one.
Nice. So what was that, the first job you managed to get?
It was in Bakersfield, California. And I went in there because they said they had a sports opening. So I went in to be a sportscaster. And they said, "Oh, our weather guy just quit yesterday. Have you ever done weather?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sure. I didn't know anything about weather, but I said, sure, I could do that." So they put me in front of the weather map and just said, "Okay, do a forecast." And I started talking about the different cities and temperatures, and I pronounced one of them wrong. And the cameraman started laughing and he just started cracking up. So I just leaned out and I said, "Well, why don't you just tell me how to pronounce it?" And he corrected me. I said it correctly and kept going. I didn't say, "Oh, can I start over?" I didn't get all flustered.
Nice.
And the news director liked that because he goes, "Wow, this guy pretty unflappable." That he didn't want to start over to have the perfect audition. He just worked with what he had, and that kind of is what carried me through my career. Doing that is being able to do live television and just going with it and not worrying about it. You make a mistake, you live on. I mean, obviously, if you swear or say something stupid. I got a job in Detroit years ago because another weather forecaster said something racially insensitive and got fired on the spot. And then I got that job. So the news director was, "Hey, have you ever said anything bad on television?" And I think most people that are on television learn where the boundary is. But live television is a lot of pressure. I marvel at how they manage every day in stressful situations. It can be very challenging.
So what is it like? I mean, it's a pretty big responsibility, particularly the weather. I mean, to get that right, people rely upon it for their, planning their schedule, that kind of thing. Did that kind of dawn on you, or initially was it just kind of happy-go-lucky, like it's just an interesting job, like on TV, or did it eventually dawn on you how important what you're doing was?
Well, because before then I had lived in Los Angeles where weather is the same every day. So, you have 3 days a year it rains, whatever. So it's hard to be wrong if you're a weather forecaster there. So they were more entertaining guys. When I got the job in Bakersfield, there was a lot of agriculture there that depended on the forecast. There was a raisin crop and they wanted to know the conditions. Is it going to freeze? Is there going to be a frost? So as I moved through my career, I had to take it a lot more seriously and learn a lot more about it, because people remember when you're wrong. If I tell you it's going to be sunny on Saturday and it rains and your family picnic is ruined, you remember that. And so you do take it more seriously because the weather does matter to people. You send your kid to school without a jacket and it's cold out. Just little things that people identify with. They know if you're wrong. And what was funny is I worked for a news director one time who would never let us say we were wrong. That the anchors always had to pat you on the back and give you an attaboy, even if you were wrong. And I used to go nuts over that. I would say, but people know, they're not stupid. Why don't we go on and explain why we were wrong? Hey, we said it was going to be sunny, but it was cold and snowed. Here's why. Instead of going, "Hey, George, you nailed another one. Good job." And that's what I hated about that business. It's such an illusion of we're right and we're superior and we're doing this for you and you need us. And I just had a hard time buying into that. I'm pretty direct and honest. If I screw up, I'm going to tell you. If I'm right, maybe I'll take credit for it. But that was very frustrating.
There's a very famous case, and I say that now, I've forgotten the exact details, of an English weathercaster or British, I should say maybe. And I think he falsely said there was going to be like some adverse weather or the other way around, and it's like haunted him. It's a very very known thing in the UK now. It's like folklore, and it's haunted him forever and a day. So I can imagine there's some pressure with that as well.
There is, you know, especially on big events, and it is a very important thing. But what people have to understand, it's not an exact science. I mean, they're wrong all the time, and they still do that, pat you on the back and tell you you're right. Because I live in Florida now, and when we first moved here, there was a hurricane that was a bullseye right for us, and the weather guy was pretty much saying this is going to be bad, blah blah blah. The hurricane turned at the last second, and they were all patting him on the back, going, "You said it was going to turn and miss us." And I was watching the whole time. It's like I knew that wasn't the case. And you know, anytime you have things like that, when they say it's going to be sunny and it rains, or things screw up, it's because it's not an exact science. Yet they market it as the most accurate, the most dependable. I wish they would just say, "We don't know." Got to be honest with you, we have no idea what's going to happen. At least we would have less anger when they screwed it up.
So I was just looking because I was curious myself as to who. So there's a British TV presenter called Michael Fish, and I'm not entirely sure what he actually did, but it's through the hurricane, blew with the hurricane. I'm not sure whether or not he says he got this 30 years past. I think he said there was no hurricane on the way before the worst storm in more than 300 years happened. That's what it was.
It's hard to walk that one back.
It's literally like there's like things called the Michael Fish moment. It's that much in the UK folklore now. But I guess it's kind of made him. He's made a career out of that. I'm curious though. From obviously you didn't have training as a meteorologist or anything like that as a weather person. Do they make that? Is that like a prerequisite now or no? Like they have other people that do the more science side, and you're the presenting side.
I think it's gotten more so because it's easier to get a meteorological degree. There's a lot of places that you could do it online. So a lot of people that are hired as weather forecasters go on to get that degree.
Right.
And it's a really good program. I think it's Mississippi State University, and there might be another couple of places that do that. So they learn a lot. But the reality is the meteorologist or the weather forecaster comes in for the 6 o'clock news, probably at 3 p.m. So they haven't been studying maps and charts all day. Some of it you have to rely on computer models and projections and the National Weather Service, because those guys are there 24 hours a day, you know, monitoring things. So it's a combination of stuff, but it seems to have gotten less entertainment, more meteorology. And then they use that to promote it and make a big deal out of it without telling us, oh, by the way, it's not an exact science. And quite often we're wrong.
I'm also, I was thinking something then, and it's literally escaped my mind. What was I going to say? Anyway, I'll come back to it. It'll come back to me. So then how many years did you went in various locations, you did the weather, and how many years did you stay within the kind of forecasting business?
I was in it for 14 years, but wow. I was also a morning show host. I did sports on the weekends. I was a feature reporter. You know, you have to produce your own segment. So I did a number of different things, but for 14 years.
Wow. And so you then, or concurrently, you started JLE Communications and then Productions. In what kind of time frame do those things come about, and why?
Well, I think it was 2001. You know, it's funny yet it's not, because it's life altering. News stations have consultants that come in and tell you how you're doing, and they try to improve your technique. And I met with the consultant at the station I was working at in San Antonio, Texas. And they said, "George, you're one of the best weathermen we've seen. You're doing a great job. There's really not much we need to work on with you. We just keep doing it. Just keep doing what you're doing." And 2 weeks later, the station fired me. The news director just hated me for whatever reason. I would say why I think it was, but then I'll probably get sued. But just the news director and the general manager, who both were just a couple of assholes, just got rid of me. And all of a sudden you're out in the world, no job. And you have to reinvent yourself. And my choices were get another job and move around the country some more, which I was sick of doing, or try to use my skills for something else. So I started a production company where I was making marketing videos for people. I did a Texas travel show, a building and remodeling show. I just started creating programming in my own ideas, because I didn't want to go through that experience again, where one hand tells you you're great and then the other hand is sticking a knife in your back.
Makes a lot of sense. I've read as well that you have dealt with hundreds of rejections. At what point in your career was that a big feature of,
from the beginning? It's brutal. And people now with Indeed.com and Freelancer, all these different things where you can just post a resume, people get upset when their piece of paper is rejected. When it's your face on camera doing something and they tell you you're not any good or they don't need you, it's pretty personal, and you have to really have a thick skin and not let that bother you. And I have hundreds of them. I've had rejections where one news director said to me, "Last I checked, you were a white guy." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I have too many white faces on my news. Can't hire you." And it's like, whoa, okay. And it's for whatever reason, your eyes are funny, your nose is too big, I don't like your voice. I mean, it's so personal. So I always tell young people that are trying to get into the business, you have to have a thick skin, because you can't take it personal. Just because somebody doesn't like you doesn't mean you're not good at what you do. It just that you have to keep trying and find a situation that's right for you, and ignore the people that don't like you. Even the most famous people, some of the most beautiful models or good-looking actors have people that just insult them on social media and
without doubt
take shots at them. Those folks are messed up by that sometimes. You got to have a thick skin, because there's a lot of haters out there.
You read, I read a lot of books, and you read very recently Kevin Hart's book, or Will Smith's, or Matthew McConaughey, and the one of the things that stems to all of them is the persistence and perseverance to kind of to continue and to kind of, they have a direction and a place they want to get to, and they'll stop at nothing to get there, and whatever comes in the way. And there is tons of rejections and people saying you're not funny, if in Kevin Hart's instance, or in Will Smith's instance, you're not interesting, or whatever the case, or you can't rap, and he has the most successful rap careers. I posted a book review, and it's very famous. This it was actually an image, and it was showing Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, and a few others. And it's very famous with Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Oprah Winfrey or Walt Disney was fired for not being creative enough. Oprah was fired for not being, a good enough broadcaster, etc., etc. And I think people are far too easy and quick to go, "Oh, someone said, my friend said, or this one said, or whoever it is who they hold in high esteem for whatever reason, like they've said that this is not the right thing for me, and therefore, like, I'm just gonna, go a different direction." Having said that, I think it's also pertinent to be prudent, maybe the word, to know when maybe to change direction at some point. How would you advise someone to know when the time's right to go, all right, like maybe this isn't for me? What's your opinion on that?
I think when you lose the joy in it, or the excitement's not there anymore. I after 14 years, parts of the job get pretty boring, but I can say now the parts that I miss are those live moments when your adrenaline gets pumping and you really have to nail it. You don't get that in the production world unless you have, like, it's a key shot in a movie you're making and you have to get that shot. It's not the same adrenaline. But I think it's time when you have no passion for it. If you're just kind of going through the motions, you're doing it because you think that's all you can do, it's very hard to be good at it. All the people you named, they're going to have their fans, and there might be people that don't like them, but they're really good at what they do. And, Kevin Hart is really funny. Matthew McConaughey's great in movies. Oprah, whether you agree with some of her stuff or not, she's a really good broadcaster. And so, they know they're good. They know they have skills, and they have some passion that drives them, that makes them successful.
It's really interesting, again, reading these books, and happen to have been Americans that I've just read of books recently for no real reason other than they are. And I don't know whether it's a nationality thing, but certainly in the UK, it's so uncouth, maybe, I don't know if that's the word, but to talk about what you're good at and your skill and that sort of stuff. Whereas it feels like in other countries, maybe the States, in certain areas, that actually that's something that should be done, and it's something that should be it's worked on. One of our bosses at Tesco, a supermarket, which is like a Walmart basically in the UK, he said to me one time, he says, if you don't toot your own horn, nobody will. And I think there's a time and a place for that. I think often, again, in this world, we don't maybe take stock of what we're good at and undervalue ourselves significantly.
Yeah, I mean, you have to market yourself. You know, I worked with a guy years ago who, when he would introduce himself to you, would give you his resume, and he would do that to everybody. And it was annoying to listen to, but the guy's very successful because was always talking about himself. I'm the kind of person that if I come into a room, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't want the attention. I would rather just be there in the room. But you have to market yourself, and you have to talk yourself up. Look at some of the most famous people, you know, because it's 2 years since Kobe Bryant passed away, but there's all these clips of him online of just how much confidence he had. And I read the book about him, that this kind of tell-all book, and there were a lot of things about him that people could knock, you know, the way his drive was and the way he would just step over people, but he had a confidence. And that's what successful people seem to have, that they're not afraid to tell you they're good at something. Mm-hmm. The problem is when people get tired of you, then that gets old. You know, that works if you're on your way up, but some of these hangers on that are still trying to tell you how great they are, they become less interesting. So it's a fine line. And anytime you're going to put your face out there or your work out there, you're going to get people that love you, but then you got to deal with the ones that don't.
Makes a lot of sense. You then come on to, so am I right in thinking, so concurrently you said with the weather forecasting, you were sick of moving around, so you came into the producing your own content world. How would you start kind of onto a new idea? Is it just your things you're picking up and what's going on in the zeitgeist, and you go, that's an interesting topic, let's explore it a bit, and then when you get to a certain point, you're like, actually, there's enough material here and it's interesting enough to make something of this?
You know, I've always had a lot of what I thought were really good ideas. What separates good ideas from ideas that people end up hearing about is having the money to be able to do the project. And that's kind of the great equalizer. So I started a Texas travel show, but I wasn't very well funded. So there was another show that was on that had a huge sponsor, and they were very successful. And it was hard for us to go anywhere. And that's kind of the equalizer when you think you want to do something. So you can have a great idea, but then you have to raise the money to make the project happen. And that's what separates things you hear about from things you don't. I heard this story the other day that Spotify paid Meghan Markle and Prince Harry $25 million for their podcast. They did one podcast.
Correct. I mean, they're thinking about pulling it as well, by the way, out of the Joe Rogan controversy.
But do they have to give the money back?
No.
Do they get to keep the 25 million? That's disgusting. People aren't going to pay you and me $25. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like $25 million for two people that are pretty universally despised because of what's happened with them over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. But somebody gave them all that money. You know how many talented podcasters there are out there that would like a few $100s? Yep. And what they could do with it. So money is the great equalizer for a lot of people. And I was on a woman's podcast, Karen Vaughn. I don't know if you've run into her yet, but one of the most inspirational, positive people. And she never lets that stand in the way of her ideas. She finds a way to get it done. I've run into more walls where sometimes it's tougher to do that. But when you can get backing for an idea, it can really make the difference between being able to do it and not do it.
It's the exact same in the, I'm active in lots of different worlds, but the tech community is the exact same. There's so many great ideas that I've come across that go absolutely nowhere. And then there's substandard ideas that are, for whatever reason, funded very heavily and all of a sudden become the next unicorn or whatever you want to call it. So I suppose it kind of, I have an interesting relationship with money. I just think it's, there's too many puppet masters out there, you know, pulling the strings, and that's the capitalist way, I suppose. That, you know, all these people that are sat in like ivory towers, who, whatever you want to call them, a lot of them, they're telling the world what can and cannot be kind of put out there, whether it's a business or a podcast or we talked earlier before the recording about actually getting an audience for your podcast. And one of the reasons I created this platform was exactly for the reason that I think there's far too many people out there, I call it groupthink, that are just watching or listening to Joe Rogan, or they're watching the same thing on Netflix, or they're reading the same book, the David Goggins book, or whatever it might be, that everyone's just doing the exact same things, and we're wondering why originality and individuality has kind of gone by the wayside, because we're literally all just reading and absorbing the exact same things.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, people like Joe Rogan, though, I mean, he put his time in. He didn't become a hit overnight.
Agreed.
He just stayed at it for a number of years, and he's getting trashed a lot lately for things where, you know, I think it's unfair. It's like a lot of the things, and I listen to him sometimes, but some of the things that they don't want him to say that were considered taboo before are now mainstream. You know, the bar keeps moving. So because he has interesting things on, that's what free speech is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And what drives me nuts is when people try to censor that speech because they don't like what's being said
Yep.
or they don't agree with it. What about just coming up and giving another point of view and disagreeing with it? He would give that point of view. He would listen to that person and have them on.
Yeah.
I saw a show that he did with the CNN doctor, Sanjay Gupta or whatever.
Yeah.
And they could not have been more polar opposite. But they had a very good conversation about something, and he let the guy talk. He let him express his point of view. So, you know, I do agree with you, though, that it's harder to break into that. You know, as a guy who has made videos for years, getting a viral video is very difficult to do. And I come up with ideas that I think are funny and creative, and maybe a couple hundred people see it. And then some 11-year-old kid with acne who's 100 pounds overweight lip syncs a song, gets 1 million hits on it, and the next day he's on the Today Show. And it's like,
with a merch line.
I would have to jump off a building or do something spectacular. And even then I might not get on there because it could be a big news day and they'll put something else on there ahead of me.
Yeah.
So there's no rhyme or reason. So that's the beauty of it. And it's also the frustration of it, because you think you have something good and nobody sees it. And then you see something like that. Go spend a few minutes on TikTok and see the videos that have gotten 20 million people seeing them. Makes me want to pull my hair out.
It's interesting on the Joe Rogan piece. I actually saw he was talking with Russell Brand, and the Russell Brand was, I don't know if he still is, was a vegan and pretty staunch against kind of like, you know, hunting was a particular thing. And Joe Rogan is pretty famous for being a hunter. And he was explaining to Russell Brand like why hunting actually, in his view, is a humane way of killing animals, blah blah blah. And I was watching it, and he allows a discourse. He doesn't just cut you off. You know, he gives his opinion and why, and then listens to the person, but doesn't try and like force it upon you. I think that's where he gets a really good line actually that is interesting.
Yeah, I worry more about people that want to censor speech because they don't agree with it. And
well, that's
they don't
happening
like
right now with the vax. The latest podcast, I didn't actually see it, but the backlash I've heard is about you bring on someone who said the vaccine was a hoax. I'm not exactly sure the details. I know it's wiped 2 or 3 billion off Spotify's share price. There's calls for him to be removed, and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's a worrying state of affairs when someone that's not even, that's just presenting and another opinion is not allowed to do so, for sure.
Well, sure, because that's an opportunity then for people that are pro-vaccine to explain why that guy is wrong. If you just censor that speech, the whole vaccination thing is just it's mind-boggling to me how the bar keeps moving on what they keep telling us, and that's why there's such a problem. It's like, you need to be vaccinated. Because why? Because now you can be vaccinated, boosted, and still get COVID and still spread it to people. And so it's frustrating to know what the right answer is. If the sole message was get vaccinated because it could save your life, I think they would have had a home run with that, because I keep seeing statistics that show how it saves your life. But they were telling us that it would stop the spread. They were telling us, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. And I think all these things, where do you censor speech? So the people that are against vaccines, they want to cut off. I think you listen to that. And if you truly are pro-vaccine, explain why they're wrong. That's what a dialogue is all about. But even our politicians, they can't sit down and talk about anything anymore. One side thinks this, one side thinks that, nothing gets done. How about coming to a compromise and thinking, what's good for everybody? What can we do that'll help somebody? Rather than a $5 trillion bill with 5,000 things in it, how about a bill with 2 things in it that are going to help everyone? And then maybe 2 more, and then maybe 2 more. And do things a little bit at a time. But all those greedy people in Washington just want to stuff money in their pockets for special interests, and they don't care about us. It's really sad. Boy, am I getting off on a rant. Let's pull this back.
Look, it's happening hugely in the UK right now with our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's, I don't know, basically said one thing and done the total opposite. But everyone knows politicians do that. It's just when they occasionally it comes up with the parapet, people are like, oh wow, can't believe that they're not honest people. Like, anyway, we'll come back to yourself because it's far more interesting in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
So you've worked on some different projects to mitigate against, I suppose, being reliant upon the weathercasting as a profession or an income source. And then at what point in time does the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast come along, and what is that for people that don't know?
Well, what happened was I made 2 documentary films with my production company, and I wanted another way of getting the word out and talking to people. And one of the things that I found in my films, the theme seems to be, we can't wait for the people at the top to solve our problems. It takes all of us getting involved and doing something. And a lot of people complain about problems, but who's telling us how to make it better? And so I thought, let's have a podcast where we meet people who saw a problem and then are identifying ways to solve the problem. We're not just sitting around complaining about it and saying, oh, the climate sucks, we're in trouble, we're all doomed. No, I have some environmental tips that we can all do that are easy things to do. Or I wrote a book that did this, or I'm coaching people to do that. There are people that are out there every day trying to solve problems. So my feeling was, tell us how to make it better. Don't complain. And so I started this podcast, and you and I were talking about this before. It's the challenge with those. Everybody has a podcast, right? It's like everybody's a filmmaker now. Anybody with an iPhone is a filmmaker. Everybody in LA is an actor. You know, it's like there's certain things that are just accepted. So you have to last. You have to survive. You have to find an audience. You have to find people who agree with what you're saying, and you speak to that group, and that's very challenging. You know, with TV, you go there and it's the station's job to promote you. When you have a podcast, it's your job to find a way to promote yourself. And there's no shortcuts. It's just, it's a challenging thing.
So you alluded to the production companies Move the World Film. Sorry. Is that the company?
Yes. I started Move the World Films, and I made 2 documentaries. One was called License to Parent, about the parenting problem in the United States, but around the world. You know, people are getting the job of parent with absolutely no qualifications. It's like, I always tell people, if you had to interview for the job of parent, would they have hired you? It's
great because, there was a couple of years ago, I saw a video, and I don't know who produced it now, I can't remember, but it was an interview. So it was like, I think it was before Zoom days, but let's say it was like a Zoom. And you had all these different women, and they're all interviewing, and you're watching it, and you don't know what's going on. And the person's saying, well, the job's 24/7, it's this, it's that, and da-da-da-da. Anyway, it gets to the end of the video. It's like, the job you were interviewing is for your mother. And they're like, oh, I never thought of it like that. Like sleepless nights, like you never know when you're on call, like all the different kind of things that mothers deal with. It was fantastic. And yeah, I think people forget how challenging that actually is.
Oh, there's no question. When you hear somebody say stay-at-home mom, and you think, well, boy, she's got it easy, or stay-at-home dad, he's got it easy. No, they don't. That's a tough job. That is a mind-numbing, time-consuming, full-time job that doesn't get the amount of credit that it needs, and certainly not the amount of support or education that it needs. So I made that film to address that. And then using my weather experience, my next film was called The Last House Standing. And it was about how we make choices where to live and build homes that are incapable of surviving disasters. And then we're shocked when something happens and wipes us out. And it's about how builders lobby to keep building codes low, to keep prices lower so they can have greater profits. So who's looking out for you and I when we go to buy a house? Nobody.
Yep.
And we need to know what we're doing and make better choices. And we focused on this house in Mexico Beach, Florida, that was like one of the last houses standing. It survived Hurricane Michael back in 2018 because of how they built it. So, I just wanted to wake people up and say, look, don't wait for the city to change the code. Don't wait for your builder to say, yep, I went above code. Saying I built to code is like those commercials for Rocket Mortgage where it's just okay. Is it just okay? Your house will survive 120 mile an hour wind, but we really think it's going to be 140-mile-an-hour wind. So good luck, pal. We'll see you in the food line. It's ridiculous. And I was trying to bring attention to that with that film.
I think it's interesting because I had something with my car recently that went wrong, and talking with the garage there, or the dealership, there's such an amount of asymmetric information, and that's kind of what you're talking about, where I don't trust them anyway, to be honest with you, but I'm like listening to what they're saying, and I'm like, I don't know, like, and I think there's certainly a need for self-education, all these things, but I like what you're saying in respect of people are often waiting for the government or some higher intervention, whatever that might mean or be, to solve their problems. They're not actually getting to the nub of it and kind of dealing with themselves, maybe.
Well, I think, some people might see that as overly cynical. On my part, like we recently bought a Chrysler, the hybrid minivan, and we had some questions about it. So we called the dealer. Well, the first thing, the salesman who sold us the car knew nothing about the car. So it didn't do any of the things he said. Then we called the service manager to ask him questions. He didn't know anything about the car. And the parts department guy didn't know anything about the car. And then they were shocked when I wrote a review saying they didn't know anything about the car. And they tried to explain, well, it's a new vehicle. I said, but you're selling it. Did you think of maybe taking a class and being able to explain the vehicle?
Yep.
So I'm not the first person that asks you how that works. And I find that in most things I deal with builders, with tradesmen, with different things, I'm constantly amazed how they make a living, yet they know so little about what they do. And it just makes me think that it's just a roll of the dice. You can have a guy come out and fix your air conditioning, and maybe it's something that was on page 3 of the book and he knows it, but maybe it's not. And he has no idea what he's doing. With your car, a buddy of mine scratched the front wheel of his new car recently. And he took it in and they upsold him on having his tires rotated. And he comes in and the scratch is still on the front wheel. They didn't rotate the tires. He never would have known that if he hadn't scratched his wheel. And it's like, once we find out things they don't know, it's like, who do you trust? Who do you count on? So the more knowledge you have, the better you are. And one of the best stories of that, my dad was in broadcasting and he owned radio stations when I was growing up. And he got tired of all the engineers talking BS to him and like talking down to him like he was a dummy. He went and took a class. I think it was at Harvard or some school. He took a class in engineering. He knew more than they did by the time this was done. So that was, to me, a great example of don't depend on that guy coming and telling you what's wrong. Know what's wrong yourself. And then you're in a much better position. And you can do that with everything, with buying houses, with buying cars. I wish I had learned more about the car beforehand, but I assumed that the expert selling it knew something. And that was my mistake.
It's interesting because there's a very funny Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where Larry David has, I think it's like a leak in the house. There's various things go on as usual. And he's just getting like absolutely like, he has no idea. He just doesn't think it's the right price and whatever else. And then the other guy in the equation like somehow knows what's going on and like helps him out and saves him a bunch of money. And he's like, hold on, there'll be a business here. So then he gets the other guy to go around in all different scenarios and give advice. And it turned out the advice is absolutely terrible and wrong, right? And it causes more problems than it's worth. But I'm an entrepreneur and I do see the need for some form of, I don't know how it would work, some sort of business whereby it basically helps people in these kind of situations where it's like an independent person somehow that is a conduit that calls the BS on the BS and goes, actually, no, that's a fair whatever price for this work or that work or whatever the case may be. It may exist, but I've never really come across something that's good enough or succinct or it's certainly like out there, right?
It certainly sounds like a great idea in principle, in theory, that'd be awesome to have something like that. But if everybody just raised their game a little bit. So for example, if you're buying a house, if you just understood what the local hazards were, I know people that get flooded all the time. Did they really look into what the flood risk was where they were? Did they go around and talk to neighbors? What's it like here when it rains? How high does the water get? When we were looking at a house when we were moving to Florida, a neighbor actually was walking by and I asked him what the flooding was like. And they go, you don't want to buy that house. Every time it rains, the water comes up to the front door. We were out of there only because I happened to ask that one question. It was a nice house. So we need to be better for ourselves. You need to be your own best advocate, because honestly, I don't have a lot of faith in those around us, from our politicians, who I have zero faith in, on down to most trades. Now, sometimes there's really good ones. I've had some great people come out here and do work for us, but I've had a lot of mediocre ones.
You talked about from coming up with an idea and the finance being a big part of whether that idea takes off and becomes a film, in your case, for example. But once you've made that film, once you've got that content, and you've alluded to it a little bit, like, how do you go about selling that to a Netflix or some kind of somewhere where it's going to be seen? Like, how does that process work?
That's another great equalizer in an idea. And, you know, my last film, I was able to get on public television, but it wasn't the network PBS. It was each individual station, and you hope they run it, but you really can't do anything other than call around and try to rattle them to air your film. Netflix, unless you're a celebrity or a high budget film or something very unique, you have some kind of connection, they tell you they don't want your film. They don't have you. I used to send ideas to HGTV, and they make you sign something that says, you know, we probably are already working on an idea just like yours, so you need to agree to that before you send us yours. It's very hard to break into that. It's like a fraternity that doesn't want you as a member. And, you know, I've seen, if you're a former politician, like the Obamas got a Netflix deal. Al Gore got a Netflix. Those people, if you have a name, it's easier to get in the door. So for the average little guy out there, it's tougher. And you have to struggle to try to find an audience. And you hope if you just keep plugging away, people will eventually find your product if it's good. But it's hard to land the big fish and get on those places. If somebody does, it's a great story, and I love to hear about it. Although to me, it's like the kid that lip syncs the song. It still drives me crazy because I wanted to be that person.
I'm sure one day that'll happen, right?
I'm getting a little old for that. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it doesn't stop me from trying.
So what are the next projects? Can you talk about any of them, or what you're thinking about for your next kind of filmmaking endeavors?
Well, again, it's the challenge of raising money. I have a couple ideas that I like. I have a film about families that I'm trying to move forward. And the podcast is very important for me to try to grow that, just because I told you before we went on that how competitive I am. I don't like not being good at something. And so I'm trying to grow that and see where that goes. But it's very challenging. You know, you deal with that all the time too. It's like you want people to listen to what you're doing. You have to find ways to get them exposed to it and hope that they can. But with films, you know, you need to have some money to do it. Now, I tell young filmmakers, go out and start shooting it. You know, at this time, I'm a little more realistic. You can do that at my stage, but to me, what success would be might be different than what the young person who's just trying to get exposure for a film. If I'm going to put the time into it, I really want it to hopefully make a difference.
And so I know it's obviously very subjective and varies massively, but the sort of films that you're making, like, what sort of budgets, how much does it cost to make a film like you've made or trying to make, out of curiosity?
You know, it's in that $100,000 to $150,000 range, probably, for a budget, because, you know, I shot them in 4K. I had really talented videographers working for me. I worked with a really talented editor. You have to get original music for it because you have to be able to clear the music. Where most filmmakers fall short is they make their film and then they don't have enough money to market it, because it's hard to raise the money just for the film. And you really need to do both. You have to leave enough money, so once you have your idea, then you can get it out there. And my last film, I entered in a bunch of festivals, The Last House Standing, and we got in 16 film festivals. Wow. Unfortunately, COVID was dominating the world, and most of those festivals were canceled for live appearances. And it's going there and talking to people and hopefully meeting a distributor where you can really make or break what happens to you. And we did not get that opportunity. So, you know, that's frustrating, but hey, that affected everybody. So level playing field, you just go on and try to find another way to accomplish it.
For sure. And I suppose maybe a nice way to round it off is, you have alluded to some little bits and pieces of advice, but someone that is watching this, listen to this, that's got an idea for a film, or whatever age they are, or that they're kind of interested in getting into that world, what would your advice be now, given all the experience that you've got, to someone that wants to, get into the film industry? Let's go with that.
Well, I would start putting your idea down on paper. And if you have a camera, go out and start shooting things. Maybe you can put together a trailer. You want to be somewhat careful who you send the idea to, because if people see a good idea, they'll take it, especially the bigger guys that could devour up the little guys. Years ago, I had a logo for a company I was doing, and I got a letter from the attorney at Best Buy. And they said, your logo is too similar to our logo. So I called up my attorney. He goes, these logos are nothing alike. I go, so what do I do? And he goes, change your logo. And I said, why? And he goes, because they will outlast you just to take it away from you.
Yeah.
Because they don't care. And they have that kind of money. So if you have a great film idea, don't just send it off to Universal Studios and say, what do you think? Work on it yourself, protect your idea, and then try to get a little nucleus of people maybe you can work on it with, but be persistent. And I like to think that's maybe the one thing I'm a good example of is I feel like I've had a lot of rejection and been beaten down a lot by the industry. I don't care. I'll just go for the next one. Batter up. Let's try it again. And I think you have to have that attitude where you have to have a short memory. Don't languish on what didn't work. Focus on what might work.
Just got me thinking as well. So the films you have created, or I suppose are looking to create, they're all documentary based, right? Looking at the kind of the human condition, or however you want to describe it. This is for my own personal preference and hopefully for other people as well. What documentaries have you seen recently or in the past that you would highly recommend as examples of good filmmaking or interesting or things that people haven't heard of necessarily?
Gosh, one of my favorite ones that I saw several years ago was Finding Sugar Man. Did you see that one?
I've heard
about the musician.
Heard great things.
I just thought that was incredible.
Where would is it on Netflix, or where is Finding Sugar Man? I'm sure I can figure it out.
You would have to Google where it can be seen.
Yeah.
But it's online somewhere. And then I went and saw him, Rodriguez. I went and saw him in concert a few years after that. And he was much older because they had taken the time when they were making it. But it was still incredible, this guy's story and how they did it and how they put it together. And then a lot of ones that the Social Dilemma, I think, is one I saw recently. And there's a lot of good ones. I try to watch as many as I can. And I like it when they tell a story without shoving their agenda. And that's a problem I have with some of the ones on Netflix. Who financed them when, what's that?
Like Game Changers is a good example of that.
Yeah, who made it and what their agenda was. And I try to make a film, and I can't compare myself to the really successful filmmakers, obviously, but I don't like it when they're telling me what to think. I like it when they present me the problem and let me have an opinion about it. And that's what I've done in my two films. I don't tell you how to be a parent. I don't tell you how you have to build your house. I show you there's a problem and then offer ways to fix the problem. And so those are the documentaries I tend to like the most, not the ones that are, you can tell it's the left or the right that's trying to get their point across.
And so where would someone, if it wants to find, I'll put it in the show notes, of course, but where would someone find both or either of your films if they're interested to watch them?
Well, The Last House Standing at thelasthousestanding.org. Thelasthousestanding.org. You got to put the in there. And then License to Parent is at License to Parent, LICENSE, not licensed, licensetoparentmovie.com. And then if you go to movetheworldfilms.org, I think you can link to both of them as well. And you can rent them online. The Last House Standing is also on Tubi. So if somebody doesn't want to spend any money and wants to sit through some commercials, they can watch it on Tubi for free. And it could pop up on a public television station near you as well. And then the podcast is on all platforms. So Tell Us How to Make It Better is the name. And I hope people just check it out, give it a listen. And if you have an opinion, if you have a thought or an idea, don't be shy about sending me your opinion, because I love to hear about it.
Who've you, or what kind of subjects have you covered on your podcast?
A lot of them recently have been environmental. There've been some, about climate change and how we combat that. I had a guy on who made a basketball out of eco-friendly material, so it's not leather, and they're not killing animals to make it. A guy who wrote a book about resiliency. Some other podcasters that I admire that I think are doing a really interesting job. So I try to have a diverse group of people on there. The key theme is, here's a problem and here's a way to tackle it. So when you listen to the podcast, you come away with something in 25, 30 minutes that you go, yeah, I can do that. I can make a dent in that. And that's what my goal is.
And that's a great place to leave the conversation today. I thank you very much for your time. And yeah, it's been super interesting to get an insight into the film industry, the way your mind works to an extent, your career history, and yeah, I wish you the best going forwards.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Charles. I really appreciate it.